American Civil War generals who had no clue. What they were doing explained. Ever wonder what happens when you put the wrong person in charge of an army? The American Civil War, that brutal 4-year slog from 1861 to 1865, pitted brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, and turned the young United States into a blood-soaked testing ground for leadership. Over 600,000 lives were lost, economies shattered, and a nation torn apart, all while generals on both sides tried to outmaneuver each other with strategies that ranged from brilliant to downright disastrous. But here's the thing. Not every commander was a Lee or a Grant. Some were political appointees with egos bigger than their battle plans. Others were relics of old wars who couldn't adapt to the rifles and railroads changing everything. And a few, well, they just flat out had no business leading men into the fire. In this deep dive, we're pulling back the curtain on those generals who, through blunders, hesitation, or sheer stubbornness, turned potential victories into catastrophes. These aren't just footnotes in history books. They're the guys whose mistakes cost thousands of lives and prolonged the agony of a divided country. We'll walk through their stories, from the Union blue to the Confederate gray, unpacking the moments where everything went wrong. Think of it as a cautionary tale. Leadership isn't about the stars on your shoulder. It's about the decisions in the heat of the moment. To kick things off, we'd greatly appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. It goes a long way in supporting the channel and our wonderful community. So, let's start with one of the South's most infamous screw-ups, a man whose cowardice at a key fort set the tone for Confederate woes early on. Gideon Pillow was the kind of general who talked a big game but crumbled when it mattered. Born in Tennessee in 1806, Pillow made his name as a lawyer and politician before the war, cozying up to powerful friends like James K. Polk, who got him a brigadier general spot in the Mexican-American War. There, he showed flashes of ambition, building fortifications, leading charges, but whispers of incompetence followed him, like when he allegedly dug a trench on the wrong side of a position, exposing his men to enemy fire. By the time the Civil War kicked off, Pillow was a major general in the Confederate Army, thanks more to his connections than any tactical genius. His big moment, or rather his epic fail, came at Fort Donelson in February 1862. Ulysses S. Grant's Union forces had the place surrounded, pounding away with gunboats on the Cumberland River. Pillow commanded the left wing and initially pushed back a Union assault, opening a brief escape route. It was a glimmer of hope for the trapped Confederates. But then Pillow panicked. Instead of pressing the advantage and getting his men out, he ordered them back to the fort to resupply. What? The escape path closed and the noose tightened. As Grant's troops regrouped, Pillow realized capture was imminent. Fearful of ending up in a Yankee prison, he handed command to Simon Bolivar Buckner and snuck away in a small boat across the river, leaving thousands to surrender. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the fiery cavalryman, escaped with his own troops and later fumed that Pillow had thrown away a winnable fight. The fallout was massive. Fort Donelson's fall opened the door for Union advances into Tennessee, costing the Confederacy key territory and over 13,000 prisoners. Pillow was reprimanded but somehow kept his rank, popping up at Stones River where he again showed cowardice, reportedly hiding behind a tree during heavy fighting. Jefferson Davis eventually sidelined him to desk duty. Pillow's legacy, a symbol of how political favoritism could doom an army. He lived until 1878, but history remembers him as the general who ran when his men needed him most. If that sets your blood boiling, Wait till you hear about the Union counterpart who turned a river into a slaughterhouse. Ambrose Burnside seemed like he had it all. Charisma, a killer set of sideburns, yeah, that's where the word comes from. And early war promise. Born in Indiana in 1824, he graduated from West Point, served in the Mexican War, and even invented a breech-loading carbine rifle. When the Civil War erupted, Burnside organized the first Rhode Island Volunteers and shone at First Bull Run, earning a promotion to brigadier general. He led successful coastal expeditions in North Carolina, capturing Roanoke Island and boosting Union morale. Lincoln saw potential and handed him the Army of the Potomac after George McClellan's Peninsula Campaign fizzled. But Fredericksburg in December 1862, that was Burnside's nightmare. Facing Robert E. Lee's entrenched Confederates across the Rappahannock River, Burnside planned a frontal assault, never a great idea against dug-in troops with artillery. Pontoon bridges were delayed, giving Lee time to fortify Mary's Heights, a stone wall-lined ridge perfect for defense. Burnside ordered wave after wave of Union soldiers to charge uphill into withering musket and cannon fire. It was suicide. Men fell in heaps, the ground slick with blood. One soldier later wrote it was like a great slaughter pen. Over 12,000 Union casualties piled up compared to just 5,000 for the South. Burnside wept openly, admitting, "I ought to be shot for this." The defeat crushed Northern spirits and nearly ended Burnside's career. Lincoln reassigned him to the Department of the Ohio, where he bungled the Knoxville campaign, and later the Battle of the Crater at Petersburg, where a mine explosion created a massive hole that Union troops charged into, only to get trapped and massacred. Burnside resigned in 1865, went into politics, and died in 1881. His story's a tragic one. A decent man out of his depth, whose hesitation and poor planning turned battles into bloodbaths. Speaking of poor planning, let's shift to a Confederate who made bickering an art form. Braxton Bragg was a prickly perfectionist whose temper alienated everyone around him. Born in North Carolina in 1817, Bragg was a West Point grad with a solid Mexican War record, where his artillery skills earned praise from Zachary Taylor. Retiring to plantation life, he jumped back in when the Confederacy called, rising quickly to full general. He trained troops effectively, but clashed with subordinates from the start. Jefferson Davis once said Bragg was his own worst enemy. His disasters unfolded in the Western Theater. At Perryville in October 1862, Bragg invaded Kentucky, but retreated after a tactical draw, abandoning the state and infuriating his officers. Then came Stone's River in late 1862. Bragg attacked Union forces under William Rosecrans, inflicting heavy losses but failing to follow up, retreating again and claiming victory in dispatches while his army bled. Subordinates like Leonidas Polk and William Hardy openly mutinied, petitioning Davis to remove him. Davis kept Bragg, but the pattern continued at Chickamauga. In September 1863, Bragg won a rare Confederate victory but didn't pursue, allowing the Union Army to hole up in Chattanooga. The siege backfired when Grant arrived, smashing Bragg's lines at Missionary Ridge in November. Bragg's men fled in panic, and he was relieved, ending up as Davis's advisor. Over 100,000 casualties under his command, many from his indecisiveness. Bragg died in 1876, remembered as the general who won battles but lost wars through sheer interpersonal disaster. If Bragg's ego was bad, wait for the Union general whose caution bordered on paralysis. George McClellan was the Union's golden boy until he wasn't. Born in Philadelphia in 1826, Little Mac was a West Point whiz, serving with distinction in Mexico and as an observer in the Crimean War. He built railroads, new engineering inside out. When the Civil War started, McClellan organized the Army of the Potomac into a disciplined force, earning adoration from his troops. After Bull Run, Lincoln put him in charge, and he planned the Peninsula Campaign to capture Richmond in 1862. But McClellan was pathologically cautious. Convinced Confederate numbers dwarfed his own, thanks to faulty intelligence from Allen Pinkerton, he dawdled, building fortifications instead of attacking. At Yorktown, he besieged for a month what turned out to be a weak position. During the 7 days' battles, Robert E. Lee's aggressive maneuvers spooked him into retreat, despite often outnumbering the enemy. McClellan telegraphed Lincoln, "If I save this army now, I tell you plainly that I owe no thanks to you or to any other persons in Washington." Bold words for air treat, redeemed somewhat at Antietam in September 1862, where he stopped Lee's Maryland invasion, but again he failed to pursue, letting Lee escape. Lincoln fired him, saying McClellan had the slows. He ran against Lincoln in 1864 on a peace platform, but lost. McClellan died in 1885, a what-if figure, brilliant organizer, terrible fighter. His hesitation prolonged the war, costing lives. Now for a Confederate who threw caution to the wind in the worst way. John Bell Hood was brave to a fault, reckless, really. Born in Kentucky in 1831, Hood graduated West Point, fought Comanches on the frontier. In the Confederacy, he led the Texas Brigade with dash, earning promotions after wounds at Gaines' Mill on his arm and Gettysburg, his leg amputated. By 1864, he was a full general commanding the Army of Tennessee. Replacing Joseph Johnston outside Atlanta, Hood went on the offensive against William Sherman. At Peachtree Creek in Atlanta, his attacks were bold but bloody failures, bleeding his army dry. Evacuating Atlanta in September was a strategic blow to the South. Then the Franklin-Nashville campaign. At Franklin in November 1864, Hood ordered frontal assaults on entrenched Union lines under John Schofield. It was a massacre, over 6,000 Confederate casualties in hours, including 6 generals killed. One witness called it the slaughter pen of Franklin. Undeterred, Hood limped to Nashville, where George Thomas crushed him in December, scattering his army. Hood resigned, his force decimated. He died in 1879 from yellow fever. Hood's story is one of valor turning to folly, his aggression destroying what he fought to save. On the Union side, political generals often fared worse, like this next one. Nathaniel Banks was a politician first, general second, and it showed. Born in Massachusetts in 1816, Banks was a self-made man, mill worker to Speaker of the House. A Republican, Lincoln appointed him Major General to rally support, but in the field, disaster. In the Shenandoah Valley in 1862, Banks faced Stonewall Jackson with 20,000 men, but got outmaneuvered repeatedly. At Cedar Mountain, he attacked piecemeal. At Winchester, Jackson flanked him, capturing supplies dubbed Banks' General Stores. Banks fled, losing a third of his force. Worse was the Red River Campaign in 1864. Aiming to seize cotton in Texas, Banks bungled logistics, advancing slowly while Confederates under Richard Taylor harassed him. At Mansfield, his army was routed. At Pleasant Hill, he barely held. Retreating, low river level stranded Union gunboats saved only by a clever dam. The campaign failed, costing 5,000 casualties and boosting Confederate morale. Banks was shelved to administrative duties. He died in 1894, a reminder that politics and warfare mix like oil and water. Shifting back south, Leonidas Polk was a bishop turned blunderer. Born in North Carolina in 1806, Polk left West Point for the Episcopal Church, becoming Bishop of Louisiana. When war came, his friend Jefferson Davis made him a major general despite zero military experience beyond cadet days. Polk's errors were legion. In 1861, he violated Kentucky's neutrality by occupying Columbus, pushing the state toward the Union. At Shiloh in 1862, his delays muddled Confederate attacks. Under Bragg, Polk's insubordination was notorious. He ignored orders at Perryville, contributing to retreat. At Chickamauga, he failed to attack at dawn, costing momentum. His worst, dividing forces unnecessarily like at Chattanooga. Polk met his end in 1864 near Marietta, Georgia, when a Union cannonball tore him apart while scouting. His death was almost a relief to Confederate command. Polk embodied the dangers of amateur generals, pious but deadly incompetent. John Pope was the Union's boastful bust. Born in Kentucky in 1822, Pope was West Point trained with Mexican War honors. In the West, he captured New Madrid and Island No. 10, opening the Mississippi. Lincoln brought him east to command the Army of Virginia in 1862. Pope bragged he'd see only the backs of the enemy, alienating troops. At Second Bull Run in August, Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson exploited his overconfidence. Pope misread Jackson's position, attacking piecemeal while Longstreet flanked him. The result? A rout with 14,000 Union casualties. Pope blamed subordinates, but Lincoln exiled him to Minnesota to fight Sioux uprisings. He died in 1892, his career torpedoed by hubris. Benjamin Huger was a Confederate whose slowness spelled doom. Born in South Carolina in 1805, Huger was a West Point artillery expert, chief of ordnance in Mexico. In the Confederacy, he commanded Norfolk's defenses. During the Peninsula Campaign, Huger's delays were critical. At Seven Pines, he arrived late, botching the attack. In the 7 days, his division got lost in swamps, missing key assaults. At Malvern Hill, his artillery failed to support infantry charges. Relieved after, Huger inspected ordnance until war's end. He died in 1877, a case of competence in theory, failure in practice. Finally, Franz Sigel, the Union's German fiasco. Born in Baden in 1824, Sigel was a revolutionary exile who rallied German immigrants for the Union, promoted for politics, not skill. In the Shenandoah in 1864, Sigel moved sluggishly against John Breckinridge. At Newmarket, Confederate cadets routed him. Sigel fled, abandoning the valley. Grant quipped, "If Sigel can't skin himself, he can hold a leg while someone else skins." Sigel was benched, resigning in 1865. He died in 1902, proof that ethnicity-based appointments could backfire spectacularly. These generals' tales weave a tapestry of human frailty amid war's horrors. From cowardice to caution, ego to inexperience, their blunders extended the conflict, amplifying suffering. Yet, they highlight why leaders like Grant and Sherman shone: adaptability, decisiveness, humility. The Civil War forged America anew, but at what cost? Remember, history isn't just victors, it's the mistakes that teach us most. If this hit home, dig deeper. The past has plenty more to say.